welcome back to our live podcast, the ETIN live podcast. That this week is not going to be live, more than the fact that we are live here. Because, and where is here? We are actually in Brussels right now. We have concluded the ETIN Action Forum. That has been sort of a resume and a stop from what we've been working with the last two years. And it's been a very, very useful event for us. We have done this in collaboration with the Joint Research Center on the one hand, Lisa Matti here is from there, and also from the DG Research Innovation, where we have two persons here, Bianca and Igor. So we have over this last couple of days, we have been talking about transformative innovation, obviously, but also how do we put this into practice? We go even further into the question of how to do things. And we have discussed, on the one hand, three issues have been on the plate. We have been discussing the opportunities and the challenges, obviously, in designing and putting into practice policies and measures that would stimulate innovation for transformations. So it's about, on the one hand, trying to update ourselves on let's call it the conceptual parts and how what the challenges are. With that said, we have collected insights from 60 change makers that were particularly invited, the unusual suspects, not only in the ETIN network, but now expanding through the contacts of the ARC and the RNI, their networks, and also people that we sort of heard of, to get them into the room, share their experience, and try to figure out what are the principles and the design principles for bring this into practice, implementation of transformative innovation. Because the point is the following: we share the challenges, but we have different solutions. But in doing so, there are also certain practices that we can bring together when we design this. So finally, we also talked about certain areas, try to identify certain areas that we should act upon, that are more important than others, and that we should act upon together. Because the strength of the network is actually that you get 2 + 2 is not 4, but it's 6, 8, or whatever. So that's what we've been doing. We did that in over the three years. That was, as Christian already stated from the beginning, we should see this as an opera. I thought that was a perfect way of phrasing it. We go through the narrative of the question how, but we started off with the overture. We started off with a piece like any other opera, where you bring all the themes together to that is going to play out, so we get the overview and calibrate our understanding of certain things. Then we went into the opera, and the opera played out in 3 acts, where there was variation of it turned out to be jazz, and that was the point. It was opera with jazz. So the questions, the variations on the theme of how do we do things, and how do we meet the challenges and challenges and opportunities that are in here that we identify? How do we bring this into concrete results and transformative impacts? And how do we take this further? So what I was going to ask now, for everyone to understand how this process evolved, I was actually going to ask some of those responsible for each of the acts to just walk you through what we did, and then we could go into the substance. So I was going to ask you, Elizabeth, you were part of the overture. You were actually sort of almost conducting the overture. What happened in that part? What did we do?
Super, Mikael, thank you. You're asking an Austrian here, yes?
Yes.
We are very much into opera.
Yes.
But I was just thinking, in Austria, we don't only listen to the opera, because we also have the opera ball where we dance.
Yes.
Yeah? And those of you who go to the balls, you have this very scripted opening, you know, when the ladies in white dresses and the gentlemen in dark dresses, they do something very scripted before they really engage and deep dive. No? And if I think about the overture session we had here, it was actually the only scripted session, no? Because when I realized that in all the other sessions, you brainstormed, you worked, you kind of like didn't have a script, while in the opening we had a script. And I think it was good to have a script, yeah? So what did we do in this opening? We looked at one particular example of transformative innovation, and we looked at a real challenging example, namely the steel sector. The steel sector is, I would say, one sector where we really need transformative innovation, and we particularly looked at it from the perspective of climate change. Yeah? And so we had a panel discussion where we had an industry representative, and then we had some of the other stakeholders and actors and outside views. And Mikkel, you asked me to think a little bit about like what were really the key issues emerging for me. And the takeaway messages I took from a super fascinating opening session was to turn a challenge into an opportunity. Because I think the speaker we had from Stegra, this company really turned the challenge into an opportunity. Now, the follow-up messages for me there were that in order to do that, turning the challenge into an opportunity, you need to understand the drivers, and you maybe also need to even manage the drivers of change, because you kind of like are in that complex scenario. That could be the policies, or that could be the consumer demand. So you need to understand and manage, secondly, the drivers. Thirdly, you need to remain realistic, because what might work in one situation or in one region might not work at all in another region. And here again, the Austrian comes in, because what might work in northern Sweden might not work in the center of Austria. So remain realistic. And also remain realistic in terms of financing, because in the end, money matters. We talked a lot about money. We talked actually much more about money in this opening session than I thought we would talk about money. And last but not least, the fourth message for me was don't get stuck in your box, because we had great outside views. So whenever we are too much into something, don't get stuck in your box, but take an overall view, bird's view again. So I think for me, those were the key messages.
Thank you. That's that was really I like the fact of dancing and scripting here as well. But I guess the to me when I was listening and when we were thinking, the whole point of bringing in the mature industry, the kind of the unlikely actor here, the mature industry that you would say, oh, they have centuries old traditions and they won't change, but actually see that they will change unless we don't talk about the problems, but rather the opportunities. Bringing in the opportunity thing was probably one of the more interesting outcomes of that conversation. So yeah, and I think we also calibrated a little bit of the understanding here. So it's showing what the sector innovation also brings in, the sector innovation, how it then spills over, feeds into other sectors. That was an important observation that I at least got out of it. So with that said, then the opera started. The opera started, and that's where we closed the doors and we had our discussions on our own. And Charlotte, you actually kicked it off. You kicked off the whole opera. And what was what happened?
What we did after the opening session was really to go into different kind of groups and look into what kind of challenges do we see in pursuing a transformative innovation policy. And basically, as you I think you pointed out earlier, one size doesn't fit all. You have to look into the contextual factors, because we can agree on the challenges, but in implementing it, designing it, you have to consider the contextual factors. So that was really the ending of the first day, and we continued the second day by recapping, looking at the challenges, moving from the challenges into identifying who are the actors, and their relations in keeping us in a state where we don't want to have the system. And having identified that, we looked at the processes and the activities and actions that could really move the system. What are the intervention points? What are the things that we need to focus on in order to be able to pursue transformative changes in society? And we also looked into, because this is about uncertainty. You cannot predict the future. You have to be able to manage uncertainty. So we focused also on capturing risks and uncertainty and discussed how can we manage and future we cannot predict. And that was by the end of the second session.
Yes. No, and I thought, to me, when these action were when we had this conversation, that the key messages for me, and at least it became very clear for me, that we talk so much about system change, and it seems like we're supposed to change the whole system. But what came out of it, to me at least, was very clear. This insertion points that you're talking about, the relations are sort of critical here, and where do we make the alterations, and where do we put our attention so that the system starts changing itself? And we talk about external shocks also, but I mean, to me, the takeaway was at least that it is focusing on certain insertion points that are very, very important. And also this whole thing of risk, uncertainty, we're actually dealing with uncertainty. How do we do that? That was, to me, critical. But where did we bring that then? How did we pursue this discussion in the next session, next of the opera?
Well, it's actually a moment where the participants in the different groups has consolidated a collection of elements, but still not a narrative. So we start with a description of different challenges around contextual factors, actors, activities, and even risk, but still not connecting the dots. It was like kind of layering up. So what we do in the session 3 is trying to use the challenging question about where we want to create impact, to try to see how we cluster all those elements and create some pathways about what we are trying to achieve. But also challenging what we have done in the past. It's like, well, is this collection of activities transformative enough? And if they are not transformative enough, how we can connect them, or how we can have impact by better understanding that we are working in several things at the same time. That's the overall idea behind transformative innovation. And I think that was kind of the complexity of bringing the transformative outcomes there, because they are new ideas. Some of them are very abstract, but it triggered this discussion about how we can make them work together, like very simple ideas like networking, circulating, or scaling up. Is it enough that I just work on this? Or how does it work if I just try to make sense of all of this together? I think that was kind of the spirit of the session 3, is trying to use the provocation about where we can have impact and how we can have impact in a systemic way, in a transformative way, to enable them to connect the dots. And I think that in practical terms, what happens is that beyond the layering of elements, they start to draw in the tool, in the canvas. They start to make lines and collecting elements and say something is going on.
Yeah, we should say we work with canvases.
Exactly.
So we were really putting things on the table in practice.
Exactly.
And it built on one canvas, built on the other. And just saying that for those who weren't there, that we actually work with very much a visualization of the process.
Exactly.
So, some even put glasses there.
Yes,
which was like wasn't that in your session?
Yes.
Yes, because it became the various layers.
The impact element.
No, that was fantastic. We should probably show that photo on the because we came up to various levels and people started putting glasses on top of. It was interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that the sessions we brought this idea about how we can make sense of what we are proposing in terms of activities and actors, in terms of how it makes sense even in different components, but also how the components work together. And at the end of the session 3, there was this cross-fertilization because we ran the work cafe, and the participants were able to listen the narrative from the other tables. And I think this was kind of a very rich moment, because there was a kind of a narrative in each table that was shared with the other.
Should we come back to that?
Yeah,
we do that. So because now we saw how that what we did in Charlotte's session 1, better said, was developed, and we talked about the outcomes and started making links very clearly and within the system. So how was that brought forward in the grand finale, let's put it that way.
Well, it reminded me a lot of the finale of Dialogue de Carmelite, where you have all this layered singing.
Oh,
beautiful. In our case,
Yes.
in our case, the singing was bingo, bingo.
The choir.
And that happened when the same elements emerged from the different groups in the
So how did you
conversation.
do this? When you said the bingo, what was that? What was that?
Yes, whenever we had some emerging idea that was mentioned by one of the groups, right?
The previous groups, you say?
Yes,
Yeah,
one of the
yes.
previous groups. And it was also emerging in other groups. They would sing bingo in this layered fashion.
Yes.
That reminded me a lot of this finale, this grand finale by Boulogne. So, and what really strikes me there is, this parallel with Boulogne is that in Dialogue de Carmelite, you also have this chance in the end for each character to express themselves a little bit as a solo, as a duet, or a small ensemble, right? So you have all these combinations of very few characters working together in creating more concrete narratives. And here we have the possibility then for the participants to reflect on what next. What next? And they did that in even smaller groups than before, which led to a consolidation of the knowledge, not only in terms of what's common between the big groups, but what can be done next in each reality of each one here.
That's great. So we came to a finale. We have moved forward. Now, this was a kind of an overview to see how the process unfolded, but it's still, let's dig into the questions here. And I would really like to. We have other friends around the table that participated, and sort of dig in here. But because if we start with the three topics that I was mentioning, and this has been built around. The sort of the defining, kind of getting to agreement on the principle, opportunities and challenges. And again, I emphasize the opportunities was something that came up in when we design and put into practice and implement policies and measures to support it. What were your principal findings? What is it that struck you that came out of the discussions? And I open up this to anyone that is around the table ready to kick off. And anyone wants to shoot? I mean, you were always one that trust on that.
I think there was a lot of things was about mental models and the way people are really approaching transformative innovation. I think somebody, I don't know who said that it's the wrong people working in the wrong way with the wrong things in the wrong way.
Well, minus and minus sometimes it becomes plus, but if you add the third minus, you come to minus. Yeah, mega minus.
It was quite an interesting statement.
So mental models.
Yeah, mental. And one thing which I always part in my group is that we're striving for transformative innovation policy, because when we implement it, we use, I would say, then the innovation policy 2.0, another. So we are stuck with tools and ways of working that are not fit for what we want to achieve.
Yes.
And that came along in many of the groups with the funding system, with a linear economy, with the value chains that had to
the traditional pathways.
Yes. So there was this came up again and again and again. That's why we got so many demos.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was my really big take.
Yeah, Lina, you said.
Yeah, I would like to continue on where Håkan started. I think one of the big findings for me and for our group was one of the transformative outcomes of that was the shielding, meaning that when you want to change mindset, you want to put on new glasses, you cannot just expect everyone to do that and at once, because it's new and it's scary. But if you can create these pockets, or you can use whichever word you want, if you want to talk about test beds or internal sandboxes or whatever, but environments where it's okay to experiment with new glasses, new ways of working, and try to achieve in the next demonstration effect, the networks effect, and so on. That can be a way to start approaching that system change from within, instead of focusing on the landscape not changing. what I think was very good in the workshop was that we used very explicitly the multi-level perspective as a framing and a way to orientate yourself in where are we and what can we do and what is needed in the different layers. And I thought was very, it's very interesting, this workshop, and I'm going to bring that with me in my daily work as well.
Good, good. Anything other, were there any sort of unexpected fun? I mean, I look at you, Peter. You come from a completely different environment. You're Peter Evanson is one of our sort of lead experts on platform economy and circular economy, how that kind of links, and he's
Sure.
Yes.
So one of the things that struck me is there are fundamental features that sort of reinforce conservatism in the system. And one that we highlighted was the challenge of rent seeking and corruption. This causes the system to want to put in place rules, procedures, monitoring systems. So we rail against this. We kind of challenge the fact that we're in silos and that we have all these rules and procedures, but there's a root cause for it. So if you want to change those outcomes, you got to go back to the root cause. So are there ways of being able to do experimentation to allow for freedom, but you have to be aware of the corruption that could happen if you do that, because you're basically dealing with the agent principal problem of watching to make sure that the actors say they're going to do something but actually put it in their pockets or things of that nature. Anyway, so thinking about the root causes can actually, and if there are solutions, then you're able to do more innovative things. So you mentioned the shielding, like being able to create sandboxes in a way that allow for that freedom, that allow for. Anyway, so that was, there's sort of systemic issues that hold back innovation. So we need to get down to the root causes. Why? And if you can come up with innovative solutions for that, then you can achieve your outcomes that you're looking for.
Just a comment on the sandboxes that we're talking about. The term that is often mentioned in this context are the regulatory sandboxes, where you look at legislation, etc. But we were discussing a lot about the internal policies in the organization and create this internal sandbox space, which sometimes is just as difficult to achieve. But the importance of just not looking at legislation, looking at internal mindset, internal culture, and internal processes, start experimenting with that, and freedom in that sense is probably just as important.
Doesn't it's also good that, I mean, when you say that the companies, that's kind of a cousin to the whole idea of having your internal department for skunk work, kind of provoke you, right? They go old it was an IBM, right, that set up this internal skunk work unit in order to, instead of being beaten by competition, you were beaten by your own internal competition, and that was a way of keeping yourself on the edge. And so that's an interesting thought, sort of redressed the same idea but in new clothes. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, how would that work out in bureaucracy, in ministries and in, I mean, I'm just thinking about us as the UN, like, okay, I'm not sure. I mean, we will try to with the shielding that we can experiment, but that's an additional challenge, what might be maybe a little bit more still possible in the private sector. The moment you get to bureaucracies and institutions, it's again a totally different story.
Yeah, which is why, I mean, we go back to your question on corruption. I mean, bureaucracies is the perfect spot for it, unfortunately. Yeah. Any other thoughts? I mean, from other voices?
Yes.
Yes.
We discussed a lot in our group that when we represent a system in a two-dimensional view, we very easily get a linear interpretation of what it is. So this three-dimensional view of it is actually that we really need to have a holistic view of the system that we're working in and find those collaboration, trigger points. And one really important thing here is to understand the problem. And to understand the problem, we really need to find the different actors who can discuss the problem from different views, and also experiment and learn iteratively to understand the problem even deeper. And from the learnings, we actually can derive new ways of doing things and change the system. So really, this experimentation and learning needs to be done from a holistic perspective, and especially in collaboration between, for example, public sector and the private industry.
And now coming into this, almost like the core of what, even, you know, of transformative innovation, but also what we're trying to do here, I guess. The learning process is different here. Like you always say, Shimokan, we're heading in towards uncertainty and unpredictability. So the whole combination of experimentation and learning, the setup is different. Yeah, maybe you would like to expand on that, perhaps, because I think it's core, and then we can move on to sort of how do we deal with it, because there are, even though we may face the same challenges, we do have different solutions, but the path and how we rig ourselves for meeting those, taking care of the challenges and turning it to solutions may actually have certain design principles that we can think of. That's kind of the experience. But if you just, I think this is such a critical argument with this uncertainty thing. So if you could just develop it.
Two aspects of it. First of all, you never cannot analyze success. You can only be experienced.
Yeah.
So you have to have a process which is quite open. And remember that any time when you interact with some shape of the innovation, you change yourself. Those who are on the consumer side or will change when they meet the slideware or mock-up or whatever, and that changes also on the side delivery.
Mm.
So you have to have quite an open process that allows you to interact in all parts of the process and cope for the learning that takes place.
Mm.
Because it changes. You think you have a problem, you think you need something, and then you interact with something, with people and artifacts, and you change. And that change, that learning has to in some way be embraced in the next phase. So it's and as I pointed out, it should be, since most things fail in innovation, it should be driven by affordable loss. So in the beginning, you don't want to spend a lot in the process because most things fail. And as you become and open up the innovation process and find the changes and the learning, the affordable loss becomes bigger and bigger. Mm. So it's really opening up the innovation process and have procurement drive it, have other things drive it, not to like the procurement, let the innovation drive the procurement process. Because we were discussing procurement and digitalization as two means of driving transformative innovation. And I think that is really important to be able to embrace, because we are so deeply rooted in planning. We present project plans, we present business plans, and any deviation from plan is wrong. What's the corrective action? That is completely the wrong way of approaching this kind of changes. But it's a challenge because it's really, especially in bureaucracy, where you really want to have predictability. They are built around predictability. All the regulation, everything is done around the predictability. And now we are moving into an unpredictable kind of path that we are embracing.
No, I think, I mean, I totally support that. This is interesting because now we're going into this kind of design principles here, right? The second part. But I also want to sort of emphasize this is from my perspective, has always been that, you know, innovation is so different from any other policy issues, because any other policy issues they will have education, health, you can measure and what is desirable and not, and you know, okay, so the Swedish kids, they are getting worse in reading, and then we have to do something, and then you set up a goal and you measure. In this case, if we knew where we were going and what the innovation would, the outcome would be, we shouldn't do it because it wouldn't be innovation. And that's kind of a fundamental thing for the policies and measures that we apply. We have to be open and deal with the uncertainty, just as you say. But that has consequences for how we rig ourselves.
And there's another challenge that is really a part of transformative innovation, that most of the challenges we are trying to pursue are what is called emergent properties in the society. They are not found in any of the pieces or any organizations or any individual. It's the interactions between organizations and humans that creates its macro properties.
Yes.
So
that is to say, things couldn't emerge separately, but they have to.
So reductionistic kind of thinking. understand the pieces and work with them, and then we will get the system in a new shape. That's what which also implies the experimentally kind of approach, which really breaks through this kind of traditional way of bureaucracy and the way policy and politics are made.
We actually had a perspective on the affordable loss question in that if you have a small amount of resources, you have a very small level of affordable loss. Yeah. So we raised the question or the examples of Google and Microsoft. These companies have built up huge amounts of wealth, and so they can make multiple bets on various things. And so their affordable loss is at a completely different scale than many companies now in Europe or even governments. And so building the ability to be successful, competitive, and build up that reservoir so that then you can make more bets and you have more flexibility in your affordable loss is quite critical. So that goes back to this issue of competitiveness and how do you create successful companies.
But also the faster you learn, even if you are small, the faster you learn, you go from an experiment to a learning and change. That's also the being.
Or it goes back to doing really good analysis so that when you make those bets, you have a lower chance of failing. So it's, I guess, making smart bets, and so interesting kind of debate we had.
Yeah. I was also thinking about the principle of affordable loss in the context of what you said this before, Elizabeth, that how can you address this kind of, it's interesting to do this internal regulatory sandboxes, but in huge bureaucracy, how can we do that? Because it's still threatening. The question can then be how big is our affordable loss? How small can we make this little sandbox to make it not threatening? Can we get any kind of tiny demonstration effect from a very small thing where we agree with a very small risk? How small is the one? Or how big is the one that is small enough? Can we play with the size in this context, for example? And what would that look like? That would be fun to start exploring.
Because affordable loss is not only about resources, it's mindsets also.
Well, the steel case that we talked about was a pretty big, there was $6 billion on the line, so.
Affordable loss, yeah, exactly.
That could be discussed.
Yes. This is, did we have any other kind of, because we were entering the design things and kind of the general tools and thinking that we might want to have if we're now treading on another path. And this has to do with experimentation and learning. Was there anything else that came up and that could relate this kind of same, it's about sort of approaches, about thinking about things that were mentioned.
Well, to reinforce your point, sometimes when you have smaller groups, it's easier to coordinate and make something happen versus trying to do something that has a large number of groups. And the steel case is an interesting one where you had a small number of groups, and so you're able to do that. So the coordination costs associated with launching initiatives.
Yes, because we were into coordination here. That is the reason why I broke a little bit, because we're talking about big systems. We're talking about insertion points and connecting, etc. So the coordination issue is obviously very, very critical. And any reflections on that we came out on that in particular? Jakob?
Yes, one of the provocations actually, the question were raised, where do we start if we want to change a complex system? And the answer was start anywhere, but start very, very specifically where you see that there is a potential lever and it's doable, but just start doing it. So when I heard that one, I actually reflected upon the headline for the actual forum, Action Forum.
Yes.
So I guess one of the answers is take action, even though it's very, very specific and seemingly minor, but with the right trigger points, you get the lever to really change systems.
Yeah, and it goes back to what the whole experimentation idea is. It's not only about the urgency of doing things. It's not only about start small because it's doable, but it's also about that's where the learning is, right? And like you're also planning versus doing. I mean, we need both, obviously, but we pay too little attention to the experimentation. We reduced the planning, right? My takeaway on this also was, sorry, Bianca. No, okay. It was also this whole thing of policies and measures. We tend to build layers and layers and layers, and the bigger the system gets, the more policies we get, and the more they become sort of counterproductive, or they take out one another. So there's a risk of doing too much, when in fact we should stop doing things. We should take away barriers. We should strip of certain initiatives and being too active. Maybe that's also something to reflect upon. We build layers and layers of administration and of initiatives and stuff that in the end actually becomes counterproductive. That was kind of something that came to me, at least. Bianca, you wanted to say something. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't. Now maybe to follow up on the point of starting somewhere. There was a comment yesterday, someone saying, well, the system is too complex, and there are too many intervention points, so we cannot come up with intervention points. But so in my own experience at DG and I, but also as it's come up in our group discussion, sometimes it's really necessary to start small. And here I'll give a very little example of a word that I'm very close to, system dynamics, basically innovation in policy making, we could call it that way. And the first step that we've taken in that direction in the DG, that we also discussed at the table, is very small in terms of budget, in terms of time, and so on. But that acts as a pilot, right? It's like a little experiment that we do, and hopefully it goes well. And then as you're going through the process, if you see, right, that it's delivering something that, now I'm talking about something specific, it can be something like another pilot, another type of experiment, it can be a technological experiment, whatever, then you start planning for the next step, or you don't like the word planning, but you start thinking about the next step and designing the next step as you're already going. So not at the end, but as like maybe in the middle, more or less. So you can do something maybe a bit bigger, and then start replicating here or there. You start disseminating, and maybe other colleagues, other companies, they will get interested. So it's really, for me, it's really small steps, but continuous to build it up.
There is an important point also about what scaling means, also in complicated systems. Just because something works small scale doesn't mean that it works in the next department or big scale. So we're going to keep this experimental and the strategic learning approach also throughout scaling. Continue, Joachim.
I was curious about the designing experimentation, because it's so easy to make it external. It's you, Lina, has to do it, or it's Bianca that has to do it. And what we try to, I think, I did a provocation, is really to focus on your own assumptions. Put your own assumptions on the table. Why do you think Bianca has to do it? Why do you believe that? How do you question that? How do you validate that? It might be something else. So really not externalize things. Make it your own, and make it your own. Make your assumption on the table. Be dare to question yourself. And that's an approach we will try to really discuss and apply. I don't know how well we work, but
so another thing that came up in our conversation was, what is the trigger for action? You mentioned the importance of action, and one source can be an exogenous shock, right? It can be a pandemic, or it can be a natural disaster, or it could be a war that causes that. But another one is leadership, right? That can drive change and action. Then the question becomes, where does that leadership come from? Is it organic, or can you create that leadership? So those become another set of variables that can help drive innovation.
No, that goes back to the contrasting. You were talking about the internal triggers in the system, the relations, the etc. That in the beginning, and you said there are also external factors. Yeah, friends, this guy is jumping, is ready to run away from here. We have actually quite a few minutes left. We haven't even started about where we should go move on in collaboration. But let's have two final comments on this part, and then we just try to think about when we leave this room, what do we do? Well, what are the areas that we should focus on in collaboration? And we spend a few minutes on that. Yes, you can see this conversation. We just come out of the room, and we're still full of energy. But Kjell-Håkan, please.
No, I was
very
very quickly just about what Peter was saying. Where comes the leadership from? I think we are so stuck also in thinking in scientific discoveries, and science really looks at the history and where we are current and try to explain the world. Now, entrepreneurial discovery is something that we should really promote in the society. And entrepreneurial discovery is how do I see an opportunity to create new worlds? Yes. And that kind of spirit, many people, because we don't know who will be the next Steve Jobs or Gates or whatever, but if we would teach ourselves and our children to really be entrepreneurial, understand entrepreneurial discovery, which is about how do I create new worlds given the opportunities that are around.
Or take risk.
It's part of taking risk, part of managing uncertainty, things. That's a very important aspect of the European future.
Yeah, it's a great design principle from learning that experiences that we have. Bianca, should you have a final comment on this topic, and then let's try to focus in on so we have something to do when we leave the room.
I mean, in relation to the aspect of leadership or the scaling and replication, because in our group we were talking how to scale the results of the experiments, and all too often remain at the level of a niche and they're not become mainstream. So, leadership is obviously very important, and I'm not sure this is something that we can intervene on very much because it's something that emerges and it boils down to the personal level. But those leaders or those people that have at least initially the ideas and the capabilities to go out there and so on, I think it's a lot on them also to liaise, to connect with others that can either complement their skills or have similar skills, build and this network and keep moving forward. Because it really goes through the people in the end and the trust.
Absolutely, but I do think there is something you underestimate your own argumentation here. I think because you can actually think about the type of leadership that you need in different situations. You need an entrepreneurial leader at some point. Then you need an administrative leader. And so you need different kind of leaderships, and that we can actually identify and steer. With that said, what do we do? What are the things that we should focus on when we in the shorter term? And let's think about that. Well, and also of these things, let's leave kind of the individual thing, because I think that the whole conversation, the whole event that we've had proven the point of actually doing things together. So what is it that we should focus on, and where will a collaboration be required? Any sort of thoughts on that? You're nodding, Jakob.
Yes,
So what should we focus on then?
I think, without being sector specific, I think it's more important to focus on finding collaboration between, for example, research, policy making, and practice. So really have the action view of what we are doing while doing it, so to speak. So I strongly believe we need to find networks or building communities around pressing issues where we have research, policy, and practice represented.
Excellent. Elizabeth, you kind of.
I was like, thinking about that myself. For me as a newcomer to this transformative innovation debate, the challenge sometimes is it's hugely abstract. Wow, are you abstract? Yeah. So I like that idea of let's put it together, make it a little bit more concrete. And for me, I think in addition to having these abstract cross-cutting discussions and work streams, I think it's useful to boil it down to, as we had the steam example, or as we have an energy example or a food systems example. And I'm thinking even in our shop in the division, we can do that because we actually have colleagues working on food systems. We have colleagues working on value chain traceability. We have colleagues working on circular economy. The innovation crowd doesn't necessarily interact with the other crowd. So for me, there is really kind of like value in bridging that a little bit. And that means you would still continue your work on transformative innovation, but have a little bit inspiration from the more practical things. Yeah.
So we go home to
We got a totally concrete action point. No? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, can you say?
Yeah, to follow up on both and challenge a bit what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, of course, focusing on a specific sector or value chain provides some tangibility, concreteness, something that you can almost touch with your hands in it. But it's not necessarily necessary, meaning that, for instance, something that I've had in mind and also discussed with some. So this event was great and really brought together different perspectives. We've also been really tried to be concrete and to some extent with managed. Something that could be interesting as a follow-up thing to do would be to even be more concrete. And like, for instance, in an optic of experimentation, trying out some new methodologies in a similar event, in similar like group setting. Each group could be tasked with, okay, now you have to come up with a sketch experiment on, let's say, food system, because we want to support sustainable food consumption. So what could be an experiment to do in that field? Yeah, what kind of actors we bring together? Well, and then, we will sketch it. And then it could be something else. But where in the end, you have a output.
May I continue? Because I think exactly. I think we have been, for example, doing what we call peer learning among like science parks, incubators, and what you do then, you take a concrete case. You take a concrete case, and then you have the others help you improve it. It becomes then you use the network to really help you improve what you are doing. And by doing it among the members of the network, do this kind of very concrete peer learning efforts, I think we would boost the design and implementation of transformative innovation policy a lot. And we get new kind of relations. And as you know, Jakob has been a subject for my crazy thoughts.
I'm a disciple of Håkan in that matter.
And it can be a policy incubator as well as a technology incubator or a platform incubator, like a leading lab. So it can be,
and the power of having the cases, whoever comes from a research or policy or practice perspective with their own cases, that will help from these three, let's call it, disciplines together to see things from different angles. That would be extremely interesting. That could be a little experiment we can show.
Well, that's collaboration with a purpose, right? Rather than just collaboration.
You put something in the center and then you try to improve it with the competences you have around the table. And and even you could, like Jakob was saying, you can take several of them. And then there's cross-fertilization like Christian showed, because you can cross-fertilize even though you have different concrete cases and have this kind of action.
I have a candidate for you. I think these digital product passports are potentially very transformative. They're complex and nobody understands them completely, but you got to do them. One thing that I'm seeing that I'm a little bit concerned of is that Europe is focused a lot on the regulations, the governance around product passports, but I'm watching in the US where they don't even have the regulation, they're actually developing the software to do it already. And there's actually been cases of this being deployed by companies. And I'm not seeing that happen as quickly in Europe. And so there's this disconnect of, we need the regulations to drive the innovation. Well, actually, the innovation is happening because there's so much value in a digital product passport. So anyway, there's a case.
I think this is actually a good ending point, because what we did here was to get an outsider's view on what we're doing in Europe. And one of the problems is that we too often, or probably, just look about ourselves, and there's things are happening in the world and there is a competition, and that's part of the whole transformation as well. So With that said, as to all the viewers, listeners, you can see how this has been going on over the last couple of days, and we haven't even put the beer on the table, which could further stimulate things, I can assure you. But it gave you a snapshot. As we were talking about, we have just taken the lasagna out of the oven, and this is what is percolating inside. It's not even finished. We haven't put the add-ons, the cheese on, and whatever it is. So with that said, thank you all. Thank you for sharing, for the stimulating conversation. This is just
Thank you for inviting us all.
Yeah, well, thanks to all of us. This is what it is. So to the rest of the viewers, we will be back, as the governor said, and with more insights on transformative innovation. See you soon.